What if I told you a 20-year-old boy walked into a dying band with a 12-string guitar and rewrote the history of rock? He wrote their greatest song on the edge of his bed in a tiny flat. 5 musicians built something extraordinary around him. Then, slowly and invisibly, the marketplace handed it all to one man. His bandmates were pushed aside. His face became the franchise. His genius became the cage. The Justin Hayward problem that the Moody Blues couldn't survive. Picture a sold-out arena in the early 1990s. Warm stage lights swept across thousands of faces. The opening notes of Nights in White Satin rose into the rafters, and the crowd leaned forward as one. At the center of the stage stood Justin Hayward, golden-voiced and elegant. His presence as familiar and inevitable as the song itself. To anyone watching from the seats, it looked like unity. It looked like a band that had survived everything together. The music was still there. The songs still carried their full freight of memory and emotion. But something was gone. Something essential had quietly slipped away. The Moody Blues had endured for decades, surviving the collapse of the classic rock era, the rise of punk and disco and new wave, and the shifting tides of every musical trend that had moved through the industry since the 1960s. They had continued to record and tour and fill arenas long after many of their contemporaries had scattered or folded. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Yet the band performing those arenas was not the band that had created Days of Future Past or A Question of Balance. The 5-man creative democracy that had once produced some of the most ambitious, spiritually charged rock music of the 20th century had been replaced by something far more ordinary. A legacy act built to deliver nostalgia with professional efficiency. Keyboardist Mike Pinder was gone, departed in 1978. Ray Thomas's role would later diminish as health issues took their toll. The delicate, miraculous balance of 5 distinct voices contributing equally to something larger than any individual had dissolved into the gravitational pull of a single man. Justin Hayward reflected on the late-stage reality with quiet honesty years later. The Moody's is a family, in its way, he said, because it'll always be linked because of business. That phrase told the whole story. A family linked by business, not by the transcendent creative brotherhood that had originally made them something rare. How did it come to this? How did the man who saved the Moody Blues become the reason the original Moody Blues could never survive? To understand what the Moody Blues eventually became, you first had to understand what they were before Justin Hayward walked through the door. By the autumn of 1966, the band was drowning. The Birmingham-formed group had scored a genuine hit 2 years earlier with Go Now, a soulful number that climbed to the top of the British charts in 1964 and cracked the American top 10 shortly after. But lightning had refused to strike twice. Follow-up singles stalled, audiences moved on. The band's 2 founding vocalists had departed, leaving Mike Pinder on keyboards, Ray Thomas on flute, and Graham Edge on drums trying to figure out what came next. They owed their label a significant sum. They had no clear direction. The British beat boom that had launched them was already fading. The Moody Blues were being left behind. Then, Eric Burden of the Animals recommended a young guitarist named Justin Hayward to Mike Pinder. Hayward was 20 years old, still finding his voice as a songwriter. He brought with him bass player John Lodge, who had known the band since their earliest days. The 2 young musicians walked into a group that was technically still alive, but creatively and financially desperate. What happened next changed the history of rock music. The band had been asked to record a stereo demonstration album built around DeVox's New World Symphony. Pinder suggested they write original material instead, and Hayward, sitting on the edge of his bed in a small flat, picked up a 12-string acoustic guitar that had once belonged to British skiffle legend Lonnie Donegan and wrote a song about loneliness and longing. He called it Nights in White Satin. The melody was immediately striking, but the song's full potential wasn't clear until Mike Pinder added a few bars of mellotron. Hayward recalled the moment vividly. He had played the song once, and the room was quiet. Pinder said play it again. When Hayward did, Pinder began adding the signature string arrangement that listeners would recognize for the next 60 years. He played that bit of fairy dust. Hayward remembered, and suddenly everyone went, "Oh, quite interested in this now." The album they built around that song, Days of Future Past, released in 1967, was unlike anything that had existed before. Symphonic, philosophical, emotionally vast, it positioned rock music as serious art, a vehicle for exploring the full range of human experience. The band had not simply survived their crisis, they had reinvented the medium. 6 more albums followed in rapid succession through 1972. The music press coined a term for what they were doing: progressive rock. And at the center of it all, his voice rising above the mellotron on song after song, was Justin Hayward. The 7 albums the Moody Blues recorded between 1967 and 1972 were built on a principle that was radical for their time. Every member wrote, every member sang lead, every member contributed a distinct philosophical and musical perspective to the whole. Mike Pinder wrote dense, searching pieces exploring the edges of human consciousness, his mellotron conjuring vast inner landscapes that no other band in rock could replicate. Ray Thomas brought whimsy and warmth, his flute coloring the spaces between the guitars with a sound that was entirely his own. Graeme Edge contributed spoken word poetry that framed each album's larger philosophical themes, giving the records a structure that felt more like literature than rock and roll. John Lodge wrote songs of longing and restlessness that balanced Hayward's romanticism with a harder, earthier energy. It was a genuine democracy. 5 voices, 5 visions, unified by a shared commitment to something larger than any individual ego. But democracy is a fragile thing when the marketplace gets involved. Radio programmers were not interested in the full scope of the Moody Blues' artistic vision. They wanted the hits, and the hits, with a consistency that began to feel almost mechanical, turned out to be the Justin Hayward songs. Nights in White Satin, Tuesday Afternoon, Question. His voice was the one radio reached for first. His melodies translated most directly into the currency of commercial success. Other members had brilliant songs of their own, but radio programmers and promotional teams consistently returned to Hayward as the safer commercial bet. Nobody made a conscious decision to marginalize Ray Thomas or Mike Pinder. Nobody sat in an office and announced that the Moody Blues were now Justin Hayward's band. It happened slowly, through 1,000 small moments of commercial gravity. Pete Townshend of The Who once described listening to the Moody Blues' classic albums as being like going to church. That carefully constructed, spiritually generous music was created by 5 equal contributors. But inside that church, the pews were being quietly rearranged. By the time the band was completing 7th Sojourn in 1972, exhaustion had set in deeply. The touring schedule was relentless. The creative demands were enormous. Personal relationships that had once felt natural were becoming frayed. Hayward himself wrote Question under extreme duress on a Friday night before a Saturday morning recording session, splicing together 2 entirely different songs in the same key simply to meet the label's demand. The pressure to deliver fell heaviest on the man whose name the label most wanted on the next single. It's not the way that you say it. The balance that had made the Moody Blues extraordinary was shifting, and no one inside the band had any clear idea how to stop it. By 1974, the Moody Blues had reached a breaking point that no amount of success could paper over. The 9-month world tour that followed 7th Sojourn had pushed the 5 men to the edge of genuine collapse. They had spent years living at an altitude of productivity and pressure that was simply not sustainable. Something had to give. The announcement of a temporary hiatus felt, from the outside, like a well-earned rest. 5 musicians stepping back from the machine to breathe, to write, to remember who they were when they weren't performing. That was the official story, and it was not entirely untrue. But the hiatus also revealed something no one had wanted to say out loud. Each member pursued individual projects during the break. Ray Thomas recorded a solo album called From Mighty Oaks. Graeme Edge formed his own band and hit the road. Mike Pinder, who had relocated his family to California, released a solo record called The Promise. These were sincere, personal efforts. And they were modest, commercially speaking, barely registering on the charts. The audience for the Moody Blues was waiting for the Moody Blues, not the individual pieces. Then, Justin Hayward and John Lodge sat down together at a studio in West Hampstead and made Blue Jays. The album arrived in 1975 and climbed to number 4 on the British charts and number 16 in the United States. It was warm, melodic, philosophically inclined, built on acoustic guitars and layered harmonies and the kind of emotional intimacy the Moody Blues had always made their own. Critics and fans recognized it almost immediately for what it was, a Moody Blues album made by 2 people instead of 5. For the first time, the industry and the listening public could clearly imagine the Moody Blues without 3 of the Moody Blues. Hayward and Lodge held the keys to the emotional core of the franchise. They had demonstrated, quietly and without apparent malice, that the essential ingredients of the band's sound could be carried by a duo. The sting of that realization was not lost on the other 3 members, whose solo projects had not generated anywhere near the same response. John Lodge later recalled the surreal peak of those touring years with a story that captured the distance between their image and their inner reality. He remembered walking through a customized Boeing 707 that featured 2 bedrooms, a fireplace, and a live organist on a built-in disco floor. When he reached the restroom at the back of the plane, he stood there alone and thought, "I've never been so lonely in my life. I don't really want to be on this plane." That loneliness was the emotional truth underneath all the platinum records and sold-out tours. And into that loneliness came Blue Jays, proving that the connection between just 2 of the brothers was enough to recreate the sound that millions love. Mike Pinder, settled in California with his family, refused to return to England for reunion recording sessions. The physical distance had become a psychological one as well. The original chemistry had required all 5 of them to be fully present and fully invested. Pinder was no longer fully there. The hiatus had not broken the band. It had done something more lasting. It had shown everyone, including themselves, that the band's most essential quality could be reproduced with fewer people. And that knowledge, once gained, could not be taken back. The reunion began with a catastrophe. When the Moody Blues gathered in late 1977 to record Octave, they chose a studio in Malibu, California. The sessions were marked by bad weather, logistical headaches, and a sense that the old chemistry was no longer as easy to recover. A second studio they had planned to use in Los Angeles suffered a major fire. The complications only deepened the feeling that the band had entered a new and less stable phase. The deeper problem was not the weather. Mike Pinder arrived at the sessions and found that the old spark was not there. The years apart had not refreshed the chemistry. They had allowed it to cool beyond recovery. After Octave was released in 1978, Pinder made his exit permanent. He settled permanently in California and never rejoined the group. The man who had given Nights in White Satin its defining mellotron sound, whose philosophical presence had given the band's music its mystical depth, was gone. His replacement was Patrick Moraz, a technically brilliant Swiss keyboardist who had previously played with Yes. Moraz was capable and committed, but he was not Mike Pinder. The 1980s brought commercial revival at a visible cost. A producer was brought in to modernize the band's sound for the MTV era. The result was Your Wildest Dreams in 1986, a synth-driven pop song that climbed to number 9 in the United States and reintroduced the band to younger audiences. On paper, it was a triumph, but Ray Thomas's role had diminished, and he did not contribute to the band's 1980s recordings in the way he once had. The man whose flute had defined Nights in White Satin, who had written Legend of a Mind and brought irreplaceable warmth to the band's classic catalog, was no longer part of the creative center. The balance had changed. Patrick Moraz, meanwhile, had grown frustrated with his ambiguous status within the organization. In 1991, he took the band to court, seeking millions in royalties. The trial was televised, and it exposed the band's business arrangements in uncomfortable detail. Band members fumbled to explain why Moraz appeared in all promotional photographs if he was merely a sideman. The mystical brotherhood of the classic era had given way to contractual disputes and witness stand evasions. Hayward defended the band's position calmly, noting that his own energies were always with the Moody Blues above all else. But no defense could disguise what the trial had made plain. The mystical brotherhood of 5 equal creators, built in those cold Birmingham rehearsal rooms back in 1966, had become something far more hierarchical and transactional. Justin Hayward was the center. Everyone else orbited around him, and the orbit was no longer equal. The Moody Blues were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame on April 14, 2018. In Cleveland, Ohio, Ann Wilson of Heart delivered the induction speech with warmth and grace, validating the deep emotional bond between the band and their generation. When we tripped, we took the Moody Blues along. The surviving members gathered on stage, older now, the long journey written on their faces. Graham Edge, then 77, stepped to the microphone and delivered a perfectly calibrated piece of self-deprecating comedy. "I'm not going to make a long speech," he said. "I'm 77 years old. I haven't got time. I want to thank Justin and John for putting up with me for 50 years. I want to thank me for putting up with Justin and John for 50 years." The years following the induction brought more losses. Denny Lane, the original lead vocalist, passed away in 2023. Mike Pinder, the Mellotron pioneer, whose fairy dust had transformed Nights in White Satin from a pretty folk song into something transcendent, died in 2024. Graham Edge had passed in 2021. John Lodge, Hayward's partner and creative counterweight for nearly 60 years, died in 2025. Justin Hayward remained one of the last active voices of the band's classic era. He had been clear about one thing. He would not recreate the Moody Blues with replacement players. What they had made together could not be franchised. "There was a time when it was wonderful," he said, "and then there was a time when it wasn't so. I'm just thankful that we had that time together, and I don't want to recreate it with other people." That restraint said something important about how Hayward understood his own story. He had never wanted to be the last man standing. He had wanted to be one of 5. The Justin Hayward problem had never been ego or ambition or hunger for control. It had been the most unavoidable kind of problem. He was simply too important. His voice was too recognizable. His songs were too central to the band's identity. His face was the one the audience connected to the music they loved. Once the world had decided he was the Moody Blues, the delicate, precious democracy of the 5 brothers was already living on borrowed time. The music endured. Nights in White Satin continued to sweep through rock concerts, film soundtracks, and late-night radio broadcasts, carrying its freight of memory and longing as powerfully as ever. That was the final, bittersweet legacy of the Moody Blues. The men were gone. But the music refused to go with them. Justin Hayward saved the Moody Blues, and in doing so, he made it impossible for the Moody Blues to remain what they once were. For the men who grew up with that music, who heard Nights in White Satin for the first time and felt something open up inside them, the story of the Moody Blues is the story of something rare and irreplaceable. What was your first memory of their music? Tell us in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from rock's greatest era.